and welcome to Always Take Notes.
Are you a professional writer struggling with financial difficulties? The Royal Literary Fund is here to support you. At the RLF, we believe that every writer deserves a chance to thrive, no matter what life throws your way. We offer a variety of hardship grants tailored to help professional writers in need, whether it's short-term relief or ongoing support. Perhaps you're dealing with an unexpected expense, a drop in income, or facing challenges that make writing difficult, such as illness, disability, or now relying on your pension. If you're eligible, our grants team will walk you through our discreet and confidential application process, ensuring you receive the support you need. Visit rlf.org.uk to check your eligibility and inquire today. The Royal Literary Fund. We believe writers matter because writing matters.
Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, we speak with the novelist Jojo Moyes.
We spoke to Jojo about her early career as a journalist at The Independent, about moving into writing fiction and her big break with Me Before You in 2012, and about her new book, We All Live Here.
We recorded this episode live at Hay Festival, which was excellent, but we did so in a tent on a day of unusually high wind, so there's a certain amount of creaking in the background, but it should be very much understandable. It's a great episode, and we hope you enjoy it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hay Festival. My name is Rachel, and along with Simon here, I'm the co-host of Always Take Notes, a literary podcast, and we are, of course, here with Jojo Moyes. So, without any further ado, Jojo, welcome to Always Take Notes at Hay Festival. Let's start with the new book, We All Live Here. We meet Lila in a moment of crisis. Tell us about that, and was it always your intention to start there and to see her in that moment?
Okay, well, I'll tell you a story about my publishing career. Don't panic, it's not going to be too long. But I am one of these authors who does read Amazon reviews. And for about the first 5 or 6 books that I wrote, my Amazon reviews would basically, 50% of them would say, I really loved this book, but it was very slow to start. Now, when 2 or 3 people say that, that's an opinion. But when half your readers are saying that, that's on you. So I work quite hard now to go straight into the action. I try not to leave things take so long to warm up.
And do you find this kind of chaos to resolution model a kind of particularly potent storytelling technique?
Chaos to resolution.
That was how I thought.
Very technical way of putting it. This is a really interesting thing, because my partner said to me the other day, oh, have you reached the midpoint of your story? And I said, the what? And he studies script writing. So he's really interested in the technical breaks and points and pivots in a story. I do none of that. I only operate from what feels right. So I will make things happen when they feel like they should happen. And in fact, one of my editors once said to me, I don't want you to ever go on a technical writing course because you'll overthink everything. And it kind of works for me not to think like, what was the term you just used?
Chaos to resolution.
I mean, it sounds great. I love the idea that I sound
the other thing that I
doing.
thought was about Lila recovering her agency, right?
Yeah.
At the beginning, that she's a woman who has no agency, and as the book progresses, she's able to lay boundaries and to, stand up for herself more. And that seemed to me another kind of real motor of the plot.
Again, see, I work from character. I don't work from a model. So for me, I like to take someone who perhaps is not very self-aware and then gradually, through throwing obstacles at them, give them a sense of self-awareness. And yeah, for me, that book was so much more about forgiveness and coming to terms with things. And it was really, how do I start my characters off in a place where that looks impossible, and then make it look even more impossible before I can get them to a place where that might work out for them.
And you say you're character-led. Is that how a story takes shape? You think, I can see Lila in my mind, I can see Jean, I can see Sully, I can see all these characters, and then you work from there? Or is it a little bit more diffuse?
It varies from book to book, but first I need to have an idea. I need to have a rough dilemma or something. I knew I wanted to write a story about a dysfunctional family. I've never written a family story in 17 books, and I love that thing of a really small canvas with a kind of deep drill into the way people have affected each other over the years. I don't normally do that. I normally work from a much bigger canvas. So it was a matter of, okay, how can I really upset everybody? I was thinking the other day that writers are actually quite sadistic sometimes, because take Lila at the start of this book, and I'll try not to do any spoilers for those who haven't read it, but she starts off, she's a woman of 42, she's a single mother. She's just written a book about how to repair a marriage gone stale, and 2 weeks after it was published, her husband has run off with one of the school mothers. And then I think, well, how can I make this worse? So I go, how about the school mum is really gorgeous and is known as the bendy young mistress from that point onwards. She's pretty much a yoga instructor. And then how about she's pregnant? And then, you just pile indignity and insult onto indignity and insult until you find yourself with this character in what looks like an impossibly horrible situation. That's kind of the fun bit.
And with your younger characters, so with Lila's children, how did you go about kind of getting into their heads?
I talk to my own kids. I have 3 adult children now, but, I have done my share of teenage years, and I feel like between the 3 of them, I have lived through most experiences that it's possible for a parent of teenagers to go through without giving away any of their secrets. But I'd heard from somebody else about a situation like the one that Celie goes through, and I don't think I'm betraying anything by saying that. This is a girl of 16 who is struggling with being frozen out at school. And it's much harder to deal with in an age of social media, because the freezing out extends so much further than it would have done, for example, when I was at school. And I was really struck by what had happened to this girl. And then I spoke to my daughter, who told me about someone she knew who the same thing had happened to. And then I asked my son, my youngest, did this happen at your school? And they told me this horrific tale of a girl who had once been seen to eat strangely, or someone had decided that she made a funny noise when she ate. And from this tiny infraction, it escalated outwards until everything this girl did was the subject of ridicule or contempt. She ended up leaving the school 6 months later, and nobody stuck up for her, because all these kids were afraid that if they were seen to stick up for this girl, they would become infected by her unpopularity. And so, sorry, I know I'm going on a bit, but I wanted to say that part of the fun of being character-led is that I like to introduce you to a character, and you might develop quite a strong feeling about that character initially. Initially, Celie is a pain in the butt. She's rude to her mother. She's typical teenage girl, full of attitude, grumpy, crying at breakfast. But when you're forced into Celie's shoes and you have to see the world through her eyes, you experience it quite differently, and you feel very differently about her. And I hope that a lot of the characters in this book you feel that same way about, that you may start off thinking one thing and end up thinking another.
Is that why you wanted to write the story from multiple perspectives?
Partly it's just really limiting writing through one person's perspective. And I mean, if I could, I would write multiple first-person books for everything. But it's a really... Sorry, does everybody understand what I mean by that? So you would have... Say I had 6 characters. I would begin a chapter through one character's voice and eyes. You would be in their shoes. And the joy of that is you get to see things that other characters don't see, and you get to see, secrets unfold, and it becomes a really interesting way of playing with the plot. But it's really a Marmite thing. Like, people love it or absolutely hate it, and so it's quite a high-risk thing to do. So I'm quite a coward, and I just do it in a cowardly fashion by just having a couple of chapters from somebody else.
So you write in the acknowledgements that this is your least researched book, but you've also commented elsewhere that you should never, ever write in the acknowledgements that this is your least researched book. So can you tell us about the kind of discussion that has launched.
So those of you who've read more than one of my books will know that I can write incredibly heavily researched books. So, for example, when I wrote The Giver of Stars, which is a book about horseback librarians in Kentucky in the Great Depression, more interesting than it sounds, I promise, I went to live in Kentucky in a cabin in a holler, and it was brilliant. And I spoke to loads of people, and I did loads of historical research, and that's been the case for lots of my books. When I wrote The Ship of Brides, I spent time aboard an aircraft carrier so that I could experience what it was like. I'm just somebody who finds it easier to be immersive. I find it much easier to translate things onto the page if I have experienced them. I'm not good at Google. And so I wrote this tight little family drama, comedy drama, and there was almost no research involved. I mean, there is a best friend in there who is on a journey of sexual exploration, and she came from a hairdresser that I met. That's about as much research that I did. It was a very interesting 1 year of hair colouring, I can tell you. I can hear from the laughter that some of you have read this book and you know what I'm talking about. But I just thought, you have to write something new in your acknowledgements every time. And so I thought, I'll just write, this is my least heavily researched book, but that doesn't mean there aren't people to thank. What I didn't realise it was going to mean to almost everybody who interviewed me for the first 6 weeks was, this is based on you. I didn't think about it. I've written about a writer for the first time in 17 books. I've written a book about a single mum. I've written a book about someone who's recently divorced. All those things are me, but she is not me. I can promise you she is so far from me and her life is so far from mine. It's ridiculous. And it was interesting because I thought how swiftly people want to believe that writers are writing about their own lives. And and I'm actually taking it out of the second edition because, it was my error. Yeah.
Fair enough. Where do you think that tendency to conflate kind of novelist with novel, when did it start?
Can I be really honest? I think there's a gender divide in it. I think it's a question I've never seen asked of a man, and I have seen it asked numerous times of women. It's like there is a kind of very ingrained view that women are less good at making stuff up. I can assure you we're really good at making stuff up. And it put me off writing about sex for a really long time because, I could write about aircraft carriers in 1946 or, German occupation in World War I in France, and everyone would go, she's been reading. And then you write a sex scene that's particularly juicy and everyone goes, we know what you're doing. So this is the first book that I've written that has anything like an explicit sex scene in it. It's not that explicit, by the way. It's not like, if you're looking for kind of 50 Shades type stuff, I'm not your girl. Yeah.
On the sex point, actually, moving to my next question, we've
See,
spoken
we've warmed up already.
It took us all of 30 minutes to get to
Exactly. We've spoken to a romantasy writer recently, so someone who's writing books that
Oh my God, those guys are filthy.
She said that the kind of internationally accepted scale for sexual explicitness is the chili pepper scale. So whether you're like 1, 2, or 3 chilies defines how explicit a romantasy book would be.
And are they like 3?
Well, I would say you're kind of 1.
Oh, I'm
chili.
a 1. Yeah, I'm vanilla.
Has that always, you've never had an interest in going maybe to chili 2?
Well, that would be telling. No, I have a friend who actually wrote a sexy story for one of these anonymous compilations a few years ago, but then was consumed with fear, like completely irrational fear that someone would work out which one was hers. And I had vicarious fear for her. So I think I am totally not a 3 chili person. I am a 1 chili person. And because I'm also prone to writing stupid stuff in my acknowledgements, like this was my least heavily researched book ever, I think I should just leave it at the bedroom door.
I think the scale goes to chili 5.
Does it?
Yeah. That's heavy stuff.
I might have to read some of this stuff just for research, because this is all new to me. I need to know what's going on in publishing.
Material for your next book, maybe. I promise this is the last question about sex scenes. But how do you actually find the experience of writing them? Do you find it takes more workshopping, editing, or...
I know what you're really
flows on the
asking here. No, well, there's 2 sex scenes in this. One of them is... Okay, I'm going to tell you something. The best... I did a course for the BBC called Maestro where I had to unpick what I did, and one of the sections that they wanted was about sex scenes. And I thought, well, I'm not very qualified. Well, I am qualified, obviously, but I'm not a sexy writer. Don't put yourself down, boys. No, you know what I'm saying. I'm not qualified to write. I can't say this. I'm just going to stop. Okay.
It's interesting you use the word unpick as well, which has, I would say that has a mild erotic charge.
I think that's just you, darling. Sorry, that was such low-hanging fruit. I had to go there.
We'll definitely move on from sex.
Moving on, I'm going to ask...
What were we asking?
We're going to talk about how you construct your plots.
This interview is not going how I thought it was going to go. Okay, no, all right. So there's a writer called Jonathan Tropper who I ended up using because I suddenly unlocked what I felt about sex scenes. And he wrote a book many years ago, which is a favourite book of mine. It's one of my comfort reads, and it's called How to Talk to a Widower. And I realised the thing he does brilliantly in this book is he uses the sex scene to illustrate the main character's state of mind. So in it you have a widower who is approached by the kind of hot neighbour, the middle-aged woman neighbour who is clearly a bit lonely, shall we say. And she seduces him, and he lets himself be seduced. And in this scene, it's quite explicit, but you go through all the stages of his emotion. You go through his kind of disbelief, and then kind of reluctance, and then he kind of goes with it, and then he's really into it, and then he's filled with shame and disgust afterwards. And I thought, this is what a good sex scene should do. It should tell you something about the character. It's not the end point of 2 people getting together. It's the illustration of what is going on in both their heads at the time. And so in this book, there are 2 sex scenes. One is a kind of accidental, semi-comedic sex scene, which was great fun to write because what I was doing was almost starting a relationship through the sex scene. And so it was these 2 people navigating each other with words, essentially, to start with. The second sex scene is the result of a misunderstanding, Lila's misunderstanding of what the relationship is. And it was so profoundly uncomfortable to write that my toes were literally curling. They're curling now thinking about it as I wrote the scene because, you know, I was talking about being character-led. I have to inhabit the character to write the scene. And I knew what was going on, and yet I was having to be her, kind of hopeful and misguided and just wrong. This whole thing was wrong. And so that's what I think is really important with the sex scene. It should illustrate something. I mean, clearly the romantic C5 Tully thing is a different thing that they're hoping to elicit, but for me it's about character.
So moving on from sex,
Thank you.
a question that we always ask novelists on the podcast is how they go about constructing their plots, and so whether they plot in advance, a plotter, or just dive in and follow their nose or their subconscious.
Yeah.
You've kind of alluded a little bit at the start of our conversation, but what's your approach?
I am a plotter. I mean, one of my best friends is Lisa Jewell, who is a pantser, and I find it extraordinary that she can start, because her plots are quite twisty, and have faith that she is somehow going to find out. I mean, because she's essentially constructing a whodunit, and I can't work out how her subconscious does it. I am not that person. To start, I have to have a rough idea of where the plot is going to go, where the climactic moments are going to be, where the characters are going to meet each other. I'm a great believer in note cards. I always have about 40 note cards on a table, which I'm adding to or shuffling about. I like to have a twist in my plot, at least one. And to do that, you need to, if you want that to emerge or appear, later in the book, you need to seed it somewhere early on and hope that your reader forgets about it. So I am a plotter. I love it.
Do you find that once you've worked out that shape of your plot, that you pretty much stick to it? Or do you
go
in and change and leave some to serendipity?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I never follow all my own rules for anything, but I like to have a rough idea of where I'm headed to, but I will definitely deviate. And sometimes you'll write a character who will start running away with the book. They become so enjoyable. There's a character called Jean in this book who I realised from, I think he appears on something like page 21, and immediately the book, catches fire, and I go, oh, okay, you're a big personality, and you're going to be fun. And I wrote this book much faster than I normally write books, and I think it was because I had so much fun, partly with this character, so that changed the book again. Yeah.
We wanted to come back to the new book in due course, but can we roll back now to your early life, and particularly, you've spoken elsewhere about the importance of libraries, Greg, and how that kind of opened your world to books. Can you take us back to that part of your life, your childhood, and the beginning of this, really?
Sure. My parents were artists. They didn't have much money. My mum made my clothes, and we had a library. Their first house was in Stoke Newington, which is now very lovely, but was kind of a bit more lively then. And I went to the local primary school, and next to it was a library, which was the place my mum took me every week. And I got 4 books out, and I'd usually read them by the end of Saturday. I was an only child, and I was incredibly bookish, and my parents encouraged me to read anything, comics from the local newsagents. I read the Bible, cover to cover, the Good News Bible, when I was about 12, just because I was curious. Just any adult book on the shelf was fair game for me, and they were big readers. So, I think I was probably better read as a young teenager than I am now. I was kind of reading Updike and all my mum's Penguin collection, and it was just, I just loved books.
I saw somewhere that you're a compulsive reader of horror. So
more ghosts than horror.
Okay.
Yeah, there was. I don't know if it was a 1970s thing, but you used to be able to get these paperbacks of really horrific ghost stories, and there were things like James Herbert's The Rats. Do you remember that? And we would all pass it round at school and then scream at the bits where the rats ate somebody's feet. And I have no appetite for horror or ghost stories at all now. I can't. It's too much for me. I can't do it. I won't sleep for 3 nights. But I loved them as a child.
So you left home when you were 17,
yeah.
And you supported yourself with eclectic jobs, so minicab controller, market stall holder, typist at a bank.
You've promoted me. I wasn't a market stall holder. I just worked there. I didn't own any of it. Yeah.
Subcontractor, and copywriter for a travel company. So can you tell us about this period of your life and how things developed at that stage?
I was probably an anti-intellectual. I didn't like school. I was very unhappy there. I left as soon as I could. I think my parents were hugely disappointed because they're both... they're not highly educated, but they put a great importance on culture. And I just was quite rebellious as a teenager, and I wanted to go my own way. And I did. And so I had this selection of jobs for 2 years. And then I think the last 6 months, you very sweetly described it as a travel company. It was actually Club 1830. And I imagine that from that laugh that there are enough of you in here that remember what that was like. And my job was to go out with a photographer who was actually a porn photographer in his spare time, and persuade clients, as they were called, guests, to have photographs taken for the brochure, because the company was too tight to pay for actual models. So that's what we did. And it was as grim and grubby and just soul-destroying as you can imagine, because the whole ethos of the company at the time was basically get these young people drunk and get them to have sex with each other. And it was just horrible. But it was brilliant for teaching you about human nature, whether it was human nature in crisis or drunk or having a good time. Between that and the minicab controlling and watching people come in and out of the cab office and listening to the drivers talking, all these things I've realised now were just incredibly useful material, because to be a writer you have to be interested in human nature, and believe me, between those 3 jobs all human nature was there.
Was that partly what appealed to you about journalism as well, that opportunity to go out and meet lots of different types of people and speak to them and write about their experiences?
Yes, I guess I don't know what appealed to me about journalism. I think it was just that it was something that felt right. And I remember walking into a newsroom for the first time and thinking, oh, there you are, there's my people. Like, you know, when you feel like you've never fitted in anywhere your whole life, and then suddenly there was this group of sort of slightly eccentric people at The Independent, as it then was, and I felt like I was at home. And so, yeah, I guess you have a lot of stimuli there, in that every day you don't know what's coming, you don't know what you're going to be covering, and there is a craft involved, which is you have to get the facts and then in a very short period of time arrange them into information that's going to grab the reader. There's a thing in journalism called the pyramid, where the most important facts have to be at the top, because most readers will not read past the first paragraph. And if the reader doesn't even get that far, that's on you. That's not the reader's fault. It's because you haven't written it interestingly enough. And I think that's actually quite a useful takeaway for a writer.
So much has changed in newspapers since the 1990s. And if you look back without the, no rose-tinted glasses or anything like that, I mean, how much kind of drinking and shagging was there on a 1990s
We're back to the
newspaper?
flex, are we?
This is history.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know, it was The Independent and not The Sun. So the shagging, I think, was discreet. And, I mean, that wasn't me. I was only writing. I loved it. There was a kind of camaraderie involved, because there was a collective purpose, which was everybody was trying to get the paper out, and at 6:00, that's when the presses might go. So there was this sense of energy building in the day, and everybody would help each other. And of course, you had characters, and some were great and some were not so great. But I loved it. I loved it so much that I had to have therapy when I left, because I didn't know. I over-identified with my job, and then I didn't know how not to be a journalist, if that makes sense.
It does. Am I right in thinking as well you overlapped with Helen Fielding at The Independent?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
What was that experience like? Were you there while the column became a kind of, the Bridget Jones column became?
Yeah, I mean, I tell the joke against myself, and I'm not sure if I've told Helen this, actually, because we do occasionally go for a walk together, but there was a man called Charlie Ledbetter who was in charge of the features section, and I was working nights at the time, and he came up to me one night and he said, have you ever been interested in writing a column? And I was like, well, yes. And he said, I want to do something like about a woman. I want to do something for women, something kind of, I can't even remember how he described it, but he said, let me know if you have any ideas. And I said, yeah, of course. And then because I was working nights and it was always manic, it just went straight out of my head. And then Helen did it. And she did it really bloody well. And she'd already written a book, which I think was Cause Celeb, and she created Bridget Jones. And the picture was one of the secretaries, and it was such a sort of homegrown thing, and I don't think anybody expected it to take off and become the kind of global phenomenon that it was. But I remember kicking myself that I hadn't actually just, got on with it and come up with some ideas. But I'm not sure I could have ever come up with something as good as what Helen did.
Hello listeners, you may remember that a few months ago we made some improvements to our Patreon offering, refreshing our package of successful pitches for people who support Always Take Notes. Since then, we've been so delighted to see more people join up. We've loved hearing from you about how useful you found the package and the podcast, but we're really keen to keep expanding the benefits available to all the people who support us.
So with that in mind, we've added 40 new pages of material to the package, including pitches to the New York Times, the Washington Post and the BBC. This means the whole compendium now runs to a whopping 160 pages. And we're excited to announce that for people who contribute $10 a month, we're also going to start releasing bonus mini episodes. If you'd like to know what these will sound like, there's a sample episode with Lee Child that you can listen to for free on our Patreon now.
Thanks to the help of our sponsor, Scrivener, the first 10 new sign-ups at $10 per month will receive a lifelong license to Scrivener worth £55. This specialist word processing software helps you organise long writing projects, such as novels, academic papers, and even scripts. We're now down to 8 of them left, so if you're interested, check it out as soon as you can.
These are just a few of the updates we've made to our Patreon offering. So if you'd like to find out more about how to get your hands on an ATN mug, suggest questions for upcoming guests, or join a monthly call with us to workshop a pitch, head to www.patreon.com/alwaystakenotes. That's www.patreon.com/alwaystakenotes.
And thanks so much again for all your support so far. And can we talk now about your move towards writing fiction?
Yeah.
So we always love on the show to get into the kind of nitty-gritty of agents and editors and publishers, and particularly how it worked at the beginning of someone's career. And we saw that you got a rejection from an agent, but a kind of kind rejection.
Yeah.
So saying, look, it's not publishable, but you've definitely got a voice, you should keep going.
Yes.
Take us back to then, and then how things developed to that point and also beyond that point.
So I had started writing books in my spare time. I'd written books my whole life, but I'd never actually got to the end of one. And I started writing, I think, when I was in journalism, and I wrote a whole book. And I had a friend at the time who worked for Penguin, and she knew someone who was an agent at AP Watt, which I think has now been subsumed by another agent. But she showed it to this friend who said, as you stated, very kindly, look, it's not publishable, but you've got a voice. And I realised that just sort of ignited the slightly obsessive stalker in me, because I remember, with a little bit of embarrassment, I remember literally getting the bus deliberately to go backwards and forwards past AP Watt because I felt somehow that I was closer to getting published. And then I wrote a second book, and I did get an agent from AP Watt, who was a New Zealander called Penelope, and she tried to shape this second book, which was called Geezer Bird, and which was a kind of London tale. And I realised now she was asking me questions that I didn't understand. Like she was saying, I want you to build a world, and I couldn't understand what that meant. And it took me another book to start answering these questions and to understand voice and to understand world building and to kind of see that you have to have colour in a book, that you have to speed things up and slow things down, and that if you have two climactic events too closely together, they actually sort of cancel each other out. All these things I've learned through trial and error. And then Penelope emigrated to New Zealand, which I thought was a pretty severe way of saying she didn't want to represent me. And I got another agent, and I wrote another book, whose title now eludes me, and that went to 6 different publishers, and 6 of them came back slowly in a trickle, rejecting it. And it was devastating. I just thought I'm not able to write what the market wants or what anybody wants. I mean, I didn't understand notions like the market. I was just writing stories. And then I kind of went to bed for a couple of days. I was pregnant at the time, and I was always spectacularly bad at being pregnant. Like, some people look graceful and lovely. I looked like a vomitous potato. I was just not well. And so I went to bed. And then about a month later, I came up with another idea. And it was just my good luck that it was a family saga. It was a story of 3 generations of women. And the same agent, the new agent, happened to pitch it at a time when, unbeknownst to me, the great doyens of generational fiction like Rosamund Pilcher and Maeve Binchy had started talking to their publishers about retirement. And so suddenly there was a hole in the publisher's slate, or whatever the word is. And it was my good luck to write something, or 3 chapters of something, that we submitted, and they said yeah, and it became the subject of a bidding war, which was the most exciting and terrifying thing that ever happened to me.
While you were writing those 3 sample chapters, given you'd had that rejection beforehand, did you find it hard to write it, or did you just, because you were so enamoured with the idea, you could just kind of plough on?
I'll tell you what happened is that I read Behind the Scenes at the Museum by Kate Atkinson, and I suddenly understood the notion of voice. And by voice, I don't mean the tone. I mean a writer's preoccupations, the mixture of humour and tragedy, the way the kind of archness to the tone of that book and their worldview. Like, that's her voice, and it's actually remarkably consistent in her other books. And I suddenly thought, oh, this is what they've all been going on about. And I knew I had a subject, which was these 3 generations of women. And I knew I wanted to start it with the coronation. And as soon as I started, the voice came so easily that it was a completely different way of writing. And luckily, I think there was a kind of confidence to it that had been lacking up till that point as well. And that became Sheltering Rain. Terrible title, but my first published book.
This is jumping around a little chronologically, but can we go forward to this lunch that you had with Sophie Kinsella before you?
Yeah.
When you're talking to her about your kind of concerns about it. And we saw that your publisher by this point had told you your career was unrecoverable. You'd built
That was a different publisher.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
But you'd also built an extra room in your house so you could maybe rent it out.
Yeah.
So clearly, like, where were you at that point?
Pretty depressed. Yeah, I'd written... You know, you think that when you're trying to get a book published, and, you know, number 4 was published, you think, that's it, that's all I've ever wanted. But actually it's not, because what you want is for it to sell. And for 8 books, we did the dance of me pouring my heart and soul into a book. And, you know, marketing decisions were taken, and we titled it, and we agonized about covers, and then they just were never getting anywhere near the charts. You know, I had a kind of tiny core of faithful readers, but my then publishers had definitely lost confidence in me, and I don't blame them. You know, I would have lost confidence in me too. And then I knew that, you know, I tell a story about the quality of biscuits. You can tell where you are in publishing from the quality of biscuits that they bring out. And I'd started off with kind of milk chocolate covered oaty crumbles, and now I was very much on the squashed fly biscuits, you know, the Garibaldis from the local corner shop. You know, they were
You don't want to be there.
You don't want to be there. Like, you look at that and you're like, okay, the writing is on the wall. And we had built this extra room on our house because we had 3 kids by then, and we were like, okay, how do we live? You know, I mean, it wasn't like we were not desperately poor, but we were trying to, you know, maximize the ways of earning money. I was doing journalism on the side. And I started writing this, but I heard this story on the news, which is what inspires lots of my books, bits of news. And it was a story about a young man who had been left quadriplegic after a rugby accident. And the news story was that he had persuaded his parents a few years later to take him to Dignitas, the Centre for Assisted Suicide. And I was so shocked by this story, I couldn't get it out of my head. I just kept thinking, how could you as a parent ever agree to do that? So it just kept rumbling around in my head. And then I did more reading about the story, and I realised that, you know, where the brain seeks certainty, we want to know things are right or wrong, that this was a story that defied that certainty, that it was full of grey areas, as was the whole debate, frankly. And the debate was quite high in the public consciousness at the time, as it is now. And I also had one family member and one close friend who required 24-hour care to live at the time. And when you are closely involved with somebody who lives like that, the questions of quality of life and dignity and pleasure and hope are very high in your mind. And so this story really resonated with me. And I wrote 20,000 words of it. And I find that often 20,000 words is the point at which I'm either going to give up on a story or I'm going to move forward. And I had lunch with Sophie Kinsella. We were going to a friend's memorial, and she's such a generous-natured person. I've never forgotten it. She said, "Shall we have lunch?" And I said, "I would love to." And I thought she meant like Costa Coffee. And she meant the gavroche. And we walked up to this restaurant, and she must have seen my absolute terror, because it's like, I can't afford this. And she just went, "Oh, by the way, I had some kind of Bulgarian royalties come in this morning. I don't know how to get rid of them, so I thought this would be a nice way of doing it." She did it so gracefully that she didn't even make me feel like she was giving me a gift. And so we sat and had this lunch, and I told her this story idea I'd had, and I said, "I don't know if it's any good." And I it's not my usual thing, and it could be a bit bleak, so I've introduced humour, and I don't know. Yeah, and she just listened to the whole thing, and she said, "You have to write this story." And then not just that, but that evening her husband Henry rang me, and he said, "Sophie's just been telling me about your story idea, and I think you should do it as well." And I thought about these two people who have helped keep Sophie kind of at the top of the commercial fiction markets already by that stage for about 15, 20 years. And I was like, well, they know what they're doing. And it gave me the confidence to keep going. And I've always joked with her that I basically owe her a royalty. I owe her a massive royalty.
Many lunches at
Many lunches. Yeah, we have had many lunches since. Yeah.
At what point was it clear to you, after you finished writing it, that it was going to be a big success? Was it that your publisher was very happy with it, was very excited, there was a big marketing spend? I mean,
no, because every book I'd ever done, my editors had been really happy with them. And so I'd kind of, I have a friend called Matt Wyman who's a writer, and he says basically publishing is being paid to be disappointed once a year. And that was my experience of publishing. You hope so badly, and everyone goes, I love this book, it's going to be great. And then it just goes, and that's it. So when Me Before You came out, my new publishers, I'd moved to Penguin Michael Joseph by then, and they said, we think this could be the book that helps to rebuild your career, because as you said, another publisher who'd made me an offer had changed their mind and said, we're very sorry, but we don't think your career is resurrectable, if that's a word. We think, sorry, but we're withdrawing our offer, which was great for my confidence, I can tell you.
I wonder how they feel about that now, though.
Yeah. But so they thought that I might achieve some modest sales with it. And then Richard and Judy picked it up. And it became that thing that every writer dreams of, a word of mouth book. And the first few weeks it did quite well, like it was selling a few thousand a week, which was infinitely more than my few hundred a week that was the best I'd achieved up to that point. And I kept thinking, okay, but it's going to go down soon. And then it just didn't. And week after week, like other territories would pick it up or other countries, and then someone would go, you do realise you're number one in Germany. And a friend of mine said I looked like a rabbit in headlights for about 2 years because I kept waiting for it to stop. And then the film came out, and I remember the head of MGM saying to me, you have no idea what is going to happen to you when this film comes out. And I thought, well, that's what you think, because I've already done really well. No, it was insane. Like the book sales, there was a point where I just couldn't keep track of what was happening, and so I just didn't look at any of it. It was too much.
So it's a rule of the podcast that we always ask about money and how it's interacted with people's writing lives. And I know you really hate this, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Okay.
So, when this all kicked off, how did and be as candid or as guarded as you're comfortable here, but how did the whole kind of financial side develop?
Okay, well, I don't mind telling you with this. When I went to Penguin, my contract was £50,000 for 2 books. Now, that might sound like a lot, but that's spread over a period of 3 to 4 years. You're going to take out your agent's money, which is between 15 and 20%, depending on who you're with. You're going to take out your tax. So essentially, once you strip all those away, so say you're looking at 30,000 over 2 years, that's £15,000 per book. And I was happy to get that because I really believed in Penguin. Now, I couldn't tell you what Me Before You has made me, but it has sold something like 15 million copies. And the film, I wrote the film as well, and finances a film. I wrote the film for $35,000, which was the union rate that I was entitled to as a first-time scriptwriter. The people who were brought on after me to rewrite my script the first time were paid $500,000.
Just as a quick follow-up, and then we'll leave this very un-English conversation behind. But another thing that writers who are huge bestsellers have told us is that they have been able to renegotiate away from a royalties model to a revenue share model with their publisher and made an enormous amount more money by doing that. Is that something that you have done?
No, I haven't. I'm really interested in money in terms of I'm the only person who manages mine. I don't like having financial advisors. I come from a long line of really canny women, and so I manage everything, and I've done very nicely, thank you. I feel like I've done so well through Penguin that I'm quite happy with the model that I've got. And also, there is a shared risk involved. I'm not interested in marketing my own books. I'm not interested in the many financial decisions and distribution decisions that have to be made. The older I get, all I want to do is create stuff. And they pay me very generously to do that. I'm astonished at how well I do. I'm being really honest. I'm really lucky. I'm very conscious that I'm in that top tiny percentage of writers who don't just earn a living, but earn a really good living. So I'm sure I could probably shoehorn a different deal if I wanted to, but that's not where my energy lies.
You mentioned adapting your novel yourself.
Yeah.
How did you find that experience? You mentioned earlier as well your partner working in screenplays, and it follows a much more rigid sort of story arcs, all of that kind of thing, A plots, B plots. How did you find that experience working in that form versus writing?
Oh, it was extraordinary. It was like going on, you get to your 40s and you think, well, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this 20 years. Like I can handle it. And then suddenly you're in a whole different industry with different language, different diplomacy, and different skills. And I remember thinking this learning curve is like that steep. I was very lucky in that I had two friends at the time who helped me. So there's a writer called Jonathan Harvey who used to work on Coronation Street, who is incredibly talented, and a director called Ol Parker, who some of you may know his films. The most recent one was Ticket to Paradise. And I would do a draft. They gave me the advice of just watching films that I love and then reading the scripts at the same time. And that was better advice than going on any kind of screenwriting course, because it works with the way that my brain works. And the best advice I got from Ol, because I would send both of them these drafts and they would give me notes and I would start to understand. And then those of you who know me before you know that one of the big emotional scene is Louisa reading a letter from Will in a cafe in Paris, and it's a very emotional letter, or at least it should provoke a lot of emotion in the reader by that stage. And so I'd written this into the script, and Ol said to me, yeah, this is great, but where's the camera? And I said, what do you mean, where's the camera? He said, what's the camera doing? How long do you think it's going to take you to read that letter? I said, it's about 60 seconds. He said, where's the camera? And I was like, we can move away to somebody doing this and somebody doing that. And he made me think about the fact that it's a completely different art. The camera has to be moving. There has to be movement alongside the words, because otherwise you just have nothing to focus on. And if you think about, there was an amazing film that Nicole Kidman starred in, 15 years ago, called Birth. Did anybody see it? It was a very odd film. It was about a woman who thinks that a young boy is her dead husband reincarnated. But there's one extraordinary scene in it where she is at the theatre and she suddenly realises that the child might be her husband, in her view. And the camera just rests on her face for a minute, and it becomes the most uncomfortable thing to watch, because you realise the camera never stays on someone's face for a minute. And you realise, you start watching things then and looking how the camera moves. And being on set was so useful as well, because I learned that if Will was saying something, because he couldn't move from the neck up, the words had to be perfect. They had to resonate. They had to be of interest. They couldn't be sloppy. They couldn't be... there had to be a precision to what he said. Whereas when you had Louisa, for example, running along with her fiancé on the running track, and the actor who played him was wearing a lycra onesie, and they're both quite humorous, and she's wearing the wrong bra, so she's running along like that. No one cares what the script is, because it's funny, it's visually funny. And so I started to think, this is why you have films like The Fast and the Furious. Nobody remembers the script from those. You're going, look at the car flying through the air, or look at the explosion. And it taught me so much about how to write scripts, because it is completely different. You have to think like a camera.
We're coming towards the end of our time. So,
Sorry, I've talked
no,
a
that's
lot.
fascinating. A final question from me. In terms of the genre you're operating in, so you've talked earlier today about women's commercial fiction, which is a kind of industry label. You've criticised elsewhere the term chick lit, suggesting it has kind of misogynistic tones.
Yeah.
How would you clarify or categorise the kind of work that you do?
I always really struggle with this question. I just know it's not chick lit because I feel that there's something so reductive and dismissive in that term. And I think about writers who get lumped into it, like Marion Keyes. Marion Keyes writes more effectively about depression and addiction than all number of kind of more, in air quotes, serious writers. She evokes a visceral response when you read about depression, for example. I sobbed reading her account of what it felt like to be clinically depressed. And also there is a skill involved. You know, everyone thinks they can write like Lee Child until they try to write a thriller, and then you realise there are just years of craft built up on this. So yes, I don't know what to call it. I say commercial fiction because I just like implying that I sell a lot.
You said earlier as well that with this book you'd really wanted to write a family story, a family drama.
Yeah.
Are there any other types of story that you haven't taken on yet that you'd like to?
Okay. Well, my publishers always blanch when I talk about this, but if I ever write a book that is completely out of genre, it's going to be a retelling of a massacre in the Congo that occurred in the 1960s that I became weirdly fascinated by. I used to have, as part of my research, I used to read old copies of Life magazine, and they would have these weirdly explicit pictures of terrible things that had happened that I don't think you would be allowed to show now. And there was this whole thing about a massacre in the Congo that took place at a hotel, and the missionaries' families that were involved, and the political stuff around it. And I've always wanted to write that story, but whenever I've mentioned it to any of my publishers, they've kind of gone, "Oh, really? Maybe in a while, like, can we just write something fun for
Maybe
now?"
a pseudonym. You could do it.
I could do it under a pseudonym, yeah. It would be dark, though. It would be, there would be blood.
Well, thank you, Jojo, who is now going to go and do a book signing, so anyone who wants to get their book signed, go to that. But thank you so much for your time and for speaking to us
much.
today.
I love
thank
talking
you everyone
about
for
writing.
coming.
It's so nice to get the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.
That was the Always Take Notes interview with Jojo Moyes at Hay Festival. Jojo is on Instagram at Jojo Moyes Official. She has a website, which is jojomoyes.com. And We All Live Here is published by Michael Joseph. Attention listeners of Always Take Notes. We're doing a series of live events this summer, and we'd love to see you there.
On July 3rd, we'll be speaking to Jessie Armstrong at the London Library. Jessie is the multi-award-winning screenwriter behind Peep Show, The Thick of It, and Succession.
Go to alwaystakeNotes.com to buy tickets and find out more. So, Simon, tell us about your experience of doing the interview at Hay and what your takeaway was from the interview itself.
Well, it was quite an amazing experience, actually. I mean, it was much the biggest live event that we've ever done for the
By
podcast.
Some orders of magnitude.
Yeah, at least one order of magnitude. I think there were about 500 people in a darkened tent. And yeah, it was extraordinary, actually. I mean, it was very much like bright stage lights and everything like that. I thought Jojo was a real pro. That would be what I thought. She was a really interesting and gracious interviewer, and was happy to go into all the nosy stuff that we asked about money and things like that. I think what struck me with her, and then also with Jacqueline Wilson, who we've also interviewed, and that'll be coming up in a few episodes' time, but we did that when we were here as well, was like that these women like grafted, was really my impression, that they're huge names now, massive profiles, sell gazillions of books, but that in both their cases, they really put the hours in, and it took many years to reach success. And I do often think that there is a correlation between that experience and someone being gracious as a super famous person, because I definitely had that impression.
Definitely. I mean, and being able to build, I know resilience is a slightly overused word, but in their cases, I think definitely true.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I thought she was interesting on, we had a bit of a digression on the internationally accepted chili pepper scale for sexual explicitness in romance, where she could give as good as she got on that, which I thought was good. And also interesting to hear a bit more about newspapers in the 1990s, which are now like so swathed in nostalgia from our generation of journalists, and it's always nice to hear what they were actually like.
Yes, I think we possibly got a little hung up on the sex scenes topic. I don't know. I think it was funny.
Which are, in fairness, relatively scarce.
They are.
In the book that we were discussing.
I think we had a thoroughly British conversation about it. It was great. And yes, to your point about newspapers, I found that kind of sliding doors moment regarding the column at The Independent absolutely fascinating.
I know. Incredible, right? What could have been?
And imagine if we hadn't had Bridget Jones as a result. I feel like women's culture would be very different today. Simon, what have you been doing? Speaking of graft and craft.
I've just finished. I'm on holiday now. I got my next round of my book done at the end of the week before last, and then this piece of fiction that I've been working on I have finished as well. So that is the exciting thing. And so I'm taking a couple of weeks off. This week I'm just kind of around, and then going to be on holiday in Ireland. And then I am reading a book by Mark, I think it's Bowden, the guy who wrote Black Hawk Down, and it's about the Battle of Hue. I think I'm pronouncing that, in the Vietnam War. It's published by my American publishers, so I should declare that. But it's a very interesting book because it's a big, very reported piece of narrative nonfiction on a kind of military theme. So I know how these sausages are made and just how much work goes into them. And what is interesting is that he tells it from both sides. So there's the whole American perspective, but he also has, I think pretty roughly equal number of Vietnamese perspectives and characters, and that is rare in these books, and it makes it a much richer thing, and it must have made a huge undertaking to do with translators and everything. So I think it's an impressive piece of work. And then in TV, I'm continuing to watch Succession as part of the build-up to our exciting interview with Jesse Armstrong. What about you, Rachel?
I've been watching two separate TV shows. So one with my husband called Running Point on Netflix, which is about a family which runs a basketball team in LA, which I'm told apparently is quite a good comedic representation of what it's like to run a team. It is quite silly, but it is good fun. And then I've also, in matters even more silly and even more fun, on my own, been watching the third season of And Just Like That, which is my guilty pleasure. And by the time this goes out, I will have started judging the Baillie Gifford Prize, which I am doing this year, which is exciting. Our first meeting will have been the Friday before this goes out. So it's been nice knowing everyone. I am going underground. I will be doing nothing but reading for the next few months. I will surface to do podcasts, and that's about it.
That is very exciting, and very many congratulations, Rachel. And good luck with your Olympian reading list as well for that. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acomb.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our score is by Jessica Danheiser, and our graphic design is by James Edgar.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram at Always Take Notes. We're on Twitter at Take Notes Always. If you'd like to support us on our crowdfunding page on Patreon, we're on there under Always Take Notes. And if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes or get in touch with us via our website, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.